Hello and welcome. Glad that you have joined us here today, wherever you are, and glad that you are here with us to get some biblical teaching and hopefully some community along the way. I know this isn't a normal time for any of us, and I wish I could see your smiling faces, but know that I'm glad that you're here and I'm praying for you. And please let me know if there's some specific need that you have or way that I can be praying during this time. So today what we're going to dive into is we're going to dive into the topic of discretion. And if you're like me, I felt like I knew what discretion meant, but had a hard time describing it or defining it in a way that made sense. And so I did a little bit of digging, and really it can be coupled with many different words. In the Bible, different translations will use discretion, and then others will use wisdom, or others will use insight in place of discretion. And really, I think when we're talking about discretion, we're talking about wisdom along with a self-control. It's an idea of temperance. It's an idea of reining in, pulling back, instead of reacting, instead of responding maybe rashly or quickly to a person or a circumstance or an emotion. It's a controlled, wise response. And we can see discretion in a variety of areas of our life. Finances and emotion, work, relationships, eating. There's a lot of different ways that we can show discretion or lack discretion. And so as we talk about this today, we're going to look at some biblical examples. So discretion is mostly mentioned in the book of Proverbs, and there's a couple of verses that I will point out. One is Proverbs 8:12. I, wisdom, dwell together with prudence. I possess knowledge and discretion. So you can see there those words kind of all go together. Wisdom, prudence, knowledge, discretion. They're lumped together as a list that relate to each other. Proverbs 3:21. My son, do not let wisdom and understanding out of your sight. Preserve sound judgment and discretion. Again, we have some of those same words that are connected and go together. Another interesting use of the word discretion is when King David, is talking to his son Solomon. He's talking to him about how he will be the one to build the temple when he's the king. And in 1 Chronicles 22, David kind of gives him this charge or this blessing. And here's what he says, 1 Chronicles 22, and this is verses 11 through 13. Now, my son, the Lord be with you, and may you have success and build the house of the Lord your God, as he said you would. May the Lord give you discretion and understanding when he puts you in command over Israel, so that you may keep the law of the Lord your God. Then you will have success if you are careful to observe the decrees and laws that the Lord gave Moses for Israel. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or discouraged. So the main things David's wanting to give to Solomon in this time is that he would have discretion and understanding. As he becomes king and rules over the nation of Israel, David knows those things are going to be the most important. Another time we see discretion in the Bible is in the book of Esther. If you know Esther's story, she becomes the queen, and she finds out from her cousin Mordecai that there's now an edict in the land that all the Jews will be destroyed. She herself is a Jew, and Mordecai says to her, this is your chance. You're going to have to go before the king and tell him that he needs to save your people, and tell him that you're a Jew. And she knows that there's a risk to that, but she uses discretion in the way that she responds. She takes 3 days to fast and to pray and asks the other Jewish people to do that along with her. Then not only does she spend the time fasting and praying, but as she goes before the king, he grants her his attention and says, whatever you want. She asks him to come to a banquet. Again, she does not bring her request to the king, but asks for a second banquet later on. And a lot of scholars think that what she's doing is she's setting things up for just a certain time. She's doing things in a certain way She doesn't just respond out of fear or emotion to finding out that all her people are going to be destroyed. She stops, she prays, she seeks wisdom, and she makes wise choices about how to proceed next. Another interesting story of discretion is the story of Abigail. And you may not be as familiar with her as you are with Esther, but her story is in 1 Samuel 25. So what happens is Abigail is married to a man named Nabal, and he is known to be mean and offensive. David and his men have been camped out near Nabal's flocks, some of his shepherds, his sheep, and David sends word to Nabal saying, hey, we have looked out for your shepherds and your sheep. We have taken care of the land that we've been in, and could you send us some provisions? And Nabal responds in his mean and insulting way and says, who's this David and why should I care? We're not going to send you anything. So David's response is very angry. He says to his men, put on your swords. And so off they head towards Nabal's house. Well, a servant comes running to Abigail and lets her know what has happened. She says, David and his men, they've looked out for us. They've treated our lands and our people with respect. They asked for some provisions, and Nabal has insulted them, and he's turned them down. And they are coming, and they're coming intent on killing all the men in our household. So in verse 18, this is 1 Samuel 25, it says, Abigail lost no time. She took 200 loaves of bread, 2 skins of wine, 5 dressed sheep, 5 seahs of roasted grain, 100 cakes of raisins, and 200 cakes of pressed figs, and loaded them on donkeys. Then she told her servants, go on ahead, I'll follow you. But she did not tell her husband Nabal. So she came riding towards where David and his men are now coming down a ravine. Remember, swords on, ready for revenge. Abigail comes towards them, facing them. She gets off her donkey. She bows before David on her face, and she apologizes for her husband. She offers the gifts of all this food that she's brought. She said, I didn't know that you had made a request. Forgive my husband. He's foolish. And she lifts David up and she asks him to have mercy. And so what happens here is that because Abigail thought quickly and responded in a wise way, she actually saved David from acting without discretion. He was responding rashly. He was reacting to his anger. He was reacting to his emotion. He was probably tired and he was probably hungry, and now he's also insulted. And so he's responding in anger, and Abigail stops him. And I love that he recognizes it. And he says in verse 32, David said to Abigail, praise be to the Lord, the God of Israel, who has sent you today to meet me. May you be blessed for your good judgment and for keeping me from bloodshed this day and from avenging myself with my own hands. So he realized as she came to him, he was about to do something that he was going to regret, and the blood of all these men would be on his hands. And instead, because Abigail used her good judgment, she stopped him from making a poor decision. Justice is served later, but then that is on the Lord and it's not on David. So Abigail shows discretion. Now both Esther and Abigail showed discretion, but their timing was much different. Esther had to take time to consider her course of action. She took 3 days to fast, to pray. She invited the king to one banquet, then invited him to another. She drew out the process as she is considering what to do. She's calculating her moves and what needs to be done next. Abigail didn't have that kind of time. She had to respond quickly. David's men are coming. But yet, she did not respond in panic, in fear. She didn't run away for her very life. She didn't get angry with her husband for turning these men away. She thought in a calm and controlled manner, even under pressure, under stress, under an emergency situation. She was able to carefully consider, even though it was quick, what the right thing to do would be. She was a woman of discretion, and her actions saved David and saved the people in Nabal's household. Now, there's certain areas in all of our lives where we need help with discretion. It's different for all of us. We struggle in different ways. So for you, you might struggle with discretion in your finances. It might be too easy for you to quickly spend without thinking about a budget or what the needs are, or if you really need the item you're buying. It might be easy to not have discretion when it comes to food, that maybe we're not making a calculated choice about what we're eating. We're just eating something because it sounds good or because we want it. We might lack discretion when it comes to certain people. There might be certain people in our lives that we know we will always react to instead of having a self-controlled and temperate response. Remember, when we talk about discretion, we're talking about wisdom coupled with self-control. It's wise response, it's a self-controlled response, and it's not reactionary. It's not rash. It is a thought-out course of action. One of the ways I see people lacking discretion is in social media. You may not have social media, it may not matter to you, but it's very easy for us to blast out our opinions or a response to other people's opinions if we're having a bad day or anything else. We put it out there publicly for the world to see. And sometimes I think if we're to look back at this moment years from now, will we be proud of the choice that we made in this moment? In this moment, it feels good. It feels good to let out our anger, to let out our emotions, or respond to someone's opinion or what someone has said. But how will we feel about that choice down the road? Was it a reaction or was it a calculated choice that was wise? And that's one area that can easily trip us up. I know for me, there's certain things I know that trigger my lack of discretion. One of those things can be fatigue. When I'm tired, then I know it's easier for me to respond to things, to respond out of emotion, to respond out of my tiredness instead of choosing words or choosing actions wisely. There are certain people, there are certain relationships that I know I'm more tempted towards anger. I'm more tempted to respond to in a negative way instead of slowing myself down and responding with patience and with grace. We all have those areas that we struggle in. But here's why it's important. Discretion acts as a protection for us. In fact, in Proverbs 2:11, it says, discretion will protect you and understanding will guard you. It will protect you and it will guard you. Well, why is that? Because when we respond quickly, rashly, harshly, how often do we regret that choice later? How does it reflect on our character if we're responding in anger, if we're reacting to something instead of making a calm, wise choice? It not only guards us, but it guards the Lord's honor. Because as we represent Him, we can reflect poorly on His name, and we don't bring glory to Him when we're reacting to our circumstances, when we're reacting to situations without a self-controlled, wise response. In the book we're studying, Becoming a Woman of Excellence by Cynthia Held, she says this: I don't want my lack of discretion to dishonor God or be an embarrassment or hindrance to others. When we act without discretion, we not only can dishonor the Lord with our words, our choices, our actions, but we can also hinder others as we either hurt them or indirectly they are questioning our words and our actions by what they're seeing and how we act. So I don't know what it is for you. I don't know where you need to act with more discretion, but part of it is being self-aware. As you know what your triggers are when you're tired, when you're anxious, certain people, certain situations that you know you are more likely to react to respond to without making a calculated choice. That's part of it. You can ask God if you don't know what those things are for you. You can ask Him to help you to act wisely and with discretion, and He will. He will help you grow. God bless you today.